Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China. And I'm here today to field a question that I get a lot from people who are starting martial arts training, mixed martial arts training, or curious about the sport of MMA. And they always ask me, what is your base martial art? And I don't like that question at all. I think it's stupid. And I'll tell you why, because MMA is not boxing plus wrestling or Muay Thai plus Jujitsu or kickboxing plus judo or any martial art plus another martial art plus another martial art. Okay, it's not a base martial art. I mean, maybe 20 years ago, when we watched UFC 1, 2, 3, the early ones, yeah, people had a base martial art because, again, it was all single emphasis styles. And a little later on, you had guys like Chuck Liddell, who had the base martial art of being a kickboxer. And they always used to introduce the fighters, Bruce Buffer would say, this man is a kickboxer, standing at whatever. And I guess people want to know, like, they want a story behind it, because, it's kind of fun and exciting, like bug fights. You put two different bugs in a jar, a spider and a scorpion, shake them up and watch them fight, and, see what happens. Just put the kickboxer and the wrestler together and shake them up and see what happens. But it's not like that anymore, and I honestly think it never should have been that way. And I've always approached mixed martial arts training in that regard, that mixed martial arts is its own sport and needs to be approached as such. A lot of the MMA gyms that I've seen in America and the United States tend to follow the format of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based grappling, and probably 80% of the training is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based grappling, and then striking and takedowns and clinch fighting and everything else is kind of an afterthought, the other 20%. And personally, I think that's kind of stupid. Especially if we are starting out. Now, if you're an awesome kickboxer and wrestler and you have a deficiency in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that might be a good way to train. Now, if you don't have a previous martial arts background, yeah, I think you're going to run into a lot of problems if your training is 80% Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based grappling and then everything else is an afterthought, because so much of an MMA fight is that everything else. If you watch MMA today versus MMA 20 years ago, you'll notice there's a lot more striking. I mean, before, the strikers without a grappling background would get taken down very quickly, put on the floor, and pounded. And so a lot of people simply assumed striking is useless. And now we know it's obviously not useless. You hit somebody and it hurts. If you put yourself in the correct position, you're not going to be susceptible to those takedowns. So in MMA, we need to have a foundation. We need to know how to wrestle. We need to know how to box. We need to understand Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, we need to understand those basic things. But, again, wrestling for MMA is different than wrestling for wrestling. Jiu-Jitsu for MMA is way different than Jiu-Jitsu for tournaments. Boxing for MMA is substantially different than boxing for boxing. Okay? So, when I train my students at the JX Fight Club here in Shanghai, again, the way I do it is very different from the way I saw it back in the United States and the way I was taught back in the United States. Again, I like to focus on game plans. Every fight starts from the feet. That's where we start. Okay, I spend a lot of time training on working on takedowns, learning wrestling under the context of striking. Okay? It's not enough to be a good wrestler. We have to be a good wrestler against somebody who is striking and also trying to take us down at the same time. It's not enough to be a good boxer. We have to be a good boxer against somebody who can light us up with leg kicks and head kicks, and somebody who's really good at clinch fighting and elbows and shooting in under us and keeping distance and managing the cage. I mean, the cage itself is such a huge implement in the sport of MMA. I mean, if you don't understand how to fight when your back is pressed up against a cage, or how to capitalize on that moment when your opponent is in that position, you'll be at a huge disadvantage against those who do. I mean, for the longest time, people thought head kicks, especially spinning kicks, taekwondo kicks, were worthless in MMA because the guys who were good at that stuff generally didn't know how to wrestle. And they didn't know how to box, and they didn't know jujitsu. They just knew taekwondo and karate. That sort of thing. And so, what was it, like 6-7 years ago, that Brazilian dude landed the first spinning hook kick knockout in the UFC, and everybody went crazy, and Joe Rogan started screaming, I can't believe it, he did a crazy taekwondo wheel kick and knocked it out. I've never seen that before. And meanwhile, I was thinking, like, you know, that's one of the first times I've seen anybody even try one of those in the UFC. Now, if everybody was doing it, eventually we'd see people land that quite frequently. But yeah, if we don't have a foundation of being able to stay on our feet, obviously we can't use the techniques on our feet. But if we do, if we know how to wrestle, if we know how to box, if we understand the basics of jujitsu, then guess what? Our kickboxing and our taekwondo and our spinning crazy kicks, yeah, that stuff works when we understand how to set it up. When we're not afraid and terrified and petrified to use our technique because the other guy might take us down because we also understand how to wrestle, then we can use that stuff. The first time I saw a John Jones fight, he fought Stephan Bonnar, and man, that's such a crazy, fantastic fight. I had no idea John Jones was a wrestler at the time. I had no idea he was a high-level collegiate wrestler because I saw him out taekwondoing the taekwondo guy in Stephan Bonnar. I mean, he was landing all these crazy kicks, you know, the spinning back kick and the savate oblique kicks and the side kicks and the spinning elbows. And I was like, who is this guy? He's using techniques from everything. And when I learned that he was a very high-level wrestler, it made sense. It was like, oh, well, of course he's able to throw that stuff with impunity because, you know, his grappling foundation is strong. He's not afraid of his opponent taking him down. He's not afraid of his opponent clinching with him. So again, a lot of people ask me about takedown defense because they come from a striking background and they lack the skill set to defend a takedown. And there's no quick fix or quick technique to defend the takedown. It's not enough to simply sprawl, because if you don't back that up with something, again, a good wrestler is going to capitalize on that. So if you want to get good at fighting wrestlers, you must learn how to wrestle. If you want to get good at fighting boxers, you must learn how to box. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that we shoot in on the wrestler, although sometimes that can and does work, or that we try to outbox the boxer. That means that we know something about what they know. We know what they're going to try to do before they do it. And when we understand their game, we can use ours more effectively. When we understand their strengths, again, we can use our strengths. If we don't understand their strengths, again, they will simply exploit our weaknesses. So what's my base martial art? I mean, 20 years ago, I might have said Taekwondo, because, you know, that was my thing back then. That was all I did. But again, I've evolved and progressed as a mixed martial artist to the point where, you know, I understand MMA is its own sport. And yes, sometimes we need to compartmentalize techniques so we can really understand the nitty-gritty of a specific thing, but that should not be mistaken for you know, training like a boxer, training for a boxing match, when what we really want to do is win an MMA fight. Or training like an IBJJF competitor for an IBJJF tournament, when what we really want to do is win a cage fight. Essentially, all I'm saying is train like a cage fighter if you want to be a cage fighter, guys. Anyway, thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.